The evening was a symphony of elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast fragmented light across the room, illuminating the polished faces of the elite. Amelia Devereaux clutched a glass of champagne, her manicured fingers tightening around the stem as she scanned the crowd. Her silk gown, a deep emerald green, had been chosen by Victor, her husband. "You'll outshine everyone," he had said. Yet, tonight, Amelia felt invisible. Across the room, Victor stood in his tailored tuxedo, surrounded by a circle of admirers. His laughter boomed, a sound Amelia used to adore but now found hollow. Her gaze narrowed as she noticed his hand rest briefly on the arm of a striking brunette. The woman leaned closer, her ruby-red lips forming words Amelia couldn't hear. A pang of unease tightened in her chest. Amelia tried to dismiss it. Victor was a charmer. That's what had drawn her to him 20 years ago. But something felt different tonight. His eyes darted toward his phone more often than usual, and his smile seemed rehearsed. When he finally met her gaze, he raised his glass and winked. The gesture, once endearing, now felt like a performance. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Amelia overheard Victor on the phone. He stood in the shadows near the coat check, his voice low and urgent. "Cecilia, I told you not to call tonight," he hissed. Her stomach churned. Who was Cecilia? The next morning, Amelia sat at the kitchen counter. The remnants of last night's champagne-induced headache lingering. Victor, ever the early riser, had already left for the office. His plate of untouched breakfast mocked her efforts. She remembered the name from the night before, Cecilia. The word echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. Amelia pushed aside her unease, deciding to focus on her day. But when she opened Victor's laptop to check their shared calendar, an unfamiliar email address popped up in his recent contacts. Curiosity gave way to dread as she clicked on the name. The emails were brief but intimate. From Victor, "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." From Cecilia, "You make me feel alive in ways I never imagined." Amelia closed the laptop abruptly, her hands trembling. The air felt suffocating, and the pristine kitchen, once her sanctuary, now felt foreign. Over the following weeks, Victor's behavior became increasingly erratic. Late night, business meetings, guarded phone calls, and unexplained absences became routine. When Amelia questioned him, he brushed her off with practiced ease. "You're imagining things," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Amelia's friends noticed her growing detachment. During their weekly lunch, her best friend Claire leaned in. "Are you okay? You've barely touched your salad." Amelia forced a smile. "Just tired, that's all." But Claire wasn't convinced. "You've been tired a lot lately. If something's wrong, you can tell me." Amelia hesitated. The weight of suspicion felt too heavy to share. "It's nothing, really." One night, as Victor returned home late, Amelia decided to confront him. She had spent the evening poring over his credit card statements, noticing charges at luxury hotels and high-end restaurants she hadn't visited with him. When Victor walked through the door, his tie askew and the faint scent of perfume clinging to him, Amelia stood waiting. "Who's Cecilia?" she asked, her voice trembling. Victor froze for a fraction of a second before regaining his composure. "What are you talking about? Don't lie to me, Victor. I found the emails. I know about the dinners. The hotels." Victor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Amelia, you're overreacting. Cecilia is a colleague. We've been working on a big project. That's all." "A project that involves luxury suites and love letters?" Amelia's voice rose, the pain in her chest threatening to overwhelm her. Victor stepped closer, his tone softening. "You're tired, Amelia. You've been under so much stress lately. Let's not make something out of nothing." Amelia stared at him, her heart breaking. For years, she had supported him, trusted him. Now, that trust felt like a cruel joke. A week later, Amelia received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, Victor and Cecilia, holding hands outside a beachfront resort. The intimacy between them was undeniable. Amelia felt her world crumble. The man she had built her life around, the father of her children, was a stranger. Rage bubbled beneath her sorrow. She clutched the photograph, her mind racing. If Victor thought he could betray her and walk away unscathed, he was gravely mistaken. Amelia stared at the photograph for hours, the glossy paper burning her fingertips. Her emotions swung wildly between heartbreak and seething rage. For years, she had devoted herself to Victor, sacrificing her dreams and desires to build a life together. Now, that life felt like a lie. The next morning, she began her investigation in earnest. Armed with a notebook, she listed every inconsistency in Victor's behavior over the past few months. Late-night meetings, credit card charges, unexplained phone calls. Each entry added fuel to her fury. She logged into his email again, scouring his messages for more proof. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Reservations at romantic resorts, receipts for expensive jewelry she never received, and dozens of flirtatious exchanges with Cecilia. Amelia wasn't just betrayed, she was humiliated. That evening, Amelia prepared dinner as usual, her movements robotic. Victor arrived home, his jovial mood clashing with her icy silence. "What's wrong?" he asked, placing his briefcase on the counter. Amelia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she set a plate of roast chicken in front of him and took a seat across the table. Her eyes bore into his, unflinching. "Who is Cecilia to you, Victor?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with venom. Victor froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "I told you. She's a colleague." Amelia slid the photograph across the table. "Colleagues don't hold hands at beach resorts." Victor's face paled. For a moment, he looked like a man caught in quicksand. But then his expression hardened. "You've been spying on me? Don't you dare turn this on me." Amelia snapped, her voice breaking. "You've been lying to me. Humiliating me. Do you think I'm blind?" Victor stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. "This isn't what it looks like." "Then tell me what it is. Victor, make me understand how a husband can betray his wife so completely." But Victor didn't answer. He stormed out of the house, leaving Amelia alone with her shattered heart. Determined to confront Cecilia directly, Amelia began tracking Victor's movements. She followed him discreetly, her heart pounding as she drove behind his car late one evening. He stopped at an upscale restaurant. And there she was, Cecilia. Amelia stayed in her car, watching through the window as the pair shared wine and laughter. Cecilia was everything Amelia wasn't: younger, more vibrant, exuding confidence. Amelia felt a bitter taste in her mouth. When Victor left for the restroom, Amelia made her move. She entered the restaurant, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Cecilia looked up, startled, as Amelia approached her table. "You must be Cecilia," Amelia said, her voice cold. Cecilia recovered quickly, her lips curving into a smug smile. "And you must be Amelia." The audacity of Cecilia's tone sent a jolt through Amelia. "You're destroying my marriage." Cecilia leaned back in her chair, unbothered. "Your marriage was already broken. Don't blame me for your husband's choices." The words hit like a slap. Amelia clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "He's my husband. Stay away from him." Cecilia tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "Maybe you should ask yourself why he came to me in the first place." Amelia stormed out, her fury boiling over. Cecilia's words echoed in her mind, feeding her doubts and insecurities. One night, Victor returned home late again, his tie loosened and his speech slightly slurred. Amelia was waiting for him in the living room, a half-empty bottle of wine on the coffee table. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight. Victor sighed. "Not tonight, Amelia. I'm exhausted." "No, we're talking now." She stood, blocking his path. "Do you love her?" Victor hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer she needed. Amelia's hands shook as she picked up the wine bottle. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Victor raised his hands defensively. "Amelia, calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You've ruined everything." In a fit of rage, she hurled the bottle against the wall. The glass shattered, red wine splattering like blood. Victor grabbed her wrists, trying to restrain her, but Amelia broke free. "Do you even care about me anymore?" she sobbed. "Or am I just a placeholder for the next woman you'll leave?" Victor's silence was deafening. The argument escalated into a storm of shouting and accusations. Victor, trying to defuse the situation, retreated to the bedroom and fell asleep almost instantly, leaving Amelia to stew in her anger. Fueled by rage and the remnants of alcohol, Amelia's mind spiraled. Thoughts of betrayal, humiliation, and despair consumed her. She stumbled into the kitchen, her vision blurred by tears. Her hand hovered over the knife block, her breath ragged. "If I can't have you," she whispered, "then no one will." Her actions in the next moments would change her life forever. Blinded by pain and rage, she stormed into the bedroom, the knife glinting in her hand. Victor's peaceful slumber enraged her further, the sight of his obliviousness a mockery of her anguish. Amelia didn't remember much of what happened next. Only the sound of Victor's scream and the sight of blood pooling on the white sheets remained etched in her memory. The house fell silent except for Amelia's shallow breathing. Victor writhed on the bed, clutching at his injury. The sight sobered her instantly, and panic replaced her fury. She grabbed her phone, dialing for an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, so did the police. Amelia was too distraught to resist as they placed her in handcuffs. "I didn't mean to," she stammered, her words lost in her tears. Victor was rushed to the hospital, and Amelia was taken into custody. The reality of her actions began to sink in as the cold metal of the cuffs bit into her wrists. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. The morning after the incident, Detective Harlan Monroe arrived at the Devereaux residence. The seasoned investigator had seen his fair share of domestic disputes turned violent. But something about this case unsettled him. The house, with its manicured lawn and pristine facade, didn't belong in the chaos of his usual crime scenes. Monroe walked through the bedroom, now cordoned off with yellow tape. The blood-stained sheets told a grim story. But questions lingered. Victor had survived the attack and was recovering in the hospital. But his statement was brief and evasive. Amelia's arrest report described a woman pushed beyond her limits. But Monroe knew there was always more to the story. "Check the house thoroughly," he instructed his team. "There's something we're not seeing here." Amelia sat in the cold, gray cell, her mind replaying the events of the previous night. Regret consumed her. She hadn't meant for things to go so far. But the anger and betrayal had blinded her. Now, she was facing charges of assault with a deadly weapon. And her life as she knew it was over. Her lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Hart, arrived that morning. Evelyn's sharp eyes scanned Amelia, taking in her disheveled hair and tear-streaked face. "We need to build a defense," Evelyn said. "But I need the full story, everything." Amelia hesitated. Talking about Cecilia and Victor's betrayal felt like reopening a wound. But she knew it was her only chance. Slowly, she recounted the months of suspicion, the discovery of the affair, and the breaking point that led to the attack. Evelyn listened intently, her expression unreadable. "We'll focus on mitigating factors," she finally said. "The betrayal, the emotional abuse. But you need to prepare yourself. This won't be easy." Meanwhile, Victor lay in his hospital bed, his thoughts clouded with pain and guilt. The wound on his side was a stark reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. He hadn't intended for his affair with Cecilia to destroy his marriage. But now, everything was in ruins. Cecilia visited him briefly, her presence a sharp contrast to the chaos surrounding him. "This isn't my fight," she said coldly. "I didn't sign up for this." With that, she walked out of his life, leaving Victor alone to face the consequences of his actions. For the first time, Victor realized the depth of the damage he had caused, not just to Amelia, but to himself. He vowed to testify honestly in court, even if it meant admitting his own faults. Detective Monroe dug deeper into the Devereaux' lives. Interviews with neighbors painted a picture of a seemingly perfect couple, but closer scrutiny revealed cracks in the facade. Friends described Victor as charming but aloof, while Amelia was seen as devoted but increasingly withdrawn in recent months. Monroe's team uncovered additional evidence: emails from Cecilia to Victor, receipts for lavish gifts, and surveillance footage of the pair at various locations. The detective began piecing together a narrative of betrayal, humiliation, and emotional unraveling. When Monroe interviewed Victor, The businessman admitted to the affair but downplayed its significance. Amelia overreacted. He insisted. She's always been emotional. Monroe raised an eyebrow. Emotional enough to stab you? Or was there more to it? Victor's silence spoke volumes. The trial began 2 months later. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Amelia took her place at the defense table. Victor, pale and visibly thinner, sat on the witness stand, his gaze avoiding hers. Evelyn built a defense around Amelia's emotional state, emphasizing the betrayal and psychological toll she had endured. My client acted in a moment of emotional duress. Evelyn argued. She is not a violent person but a woman driven to the edge by her husband's infidelity and years of emotional neglect. The prosecution painted a different picture, portraying Amelia as a jealous wife who let her rage boil over. Betrayal does not excuse violence. The prosecutor declared. Victor Devereaux may have been unfaithful, but he did not deserve to be attacked in his own home. Victor's testimony was pivotal. He admitted to the affair and acknowledged his role in the breakdown of their marriage. I hurt her, he said, his voice breaking, but I never thought it would come to this. Amelia's tearful testimony moved the jury. She spoke of her love for Victor, the sacrifices she had made, and the unbearable pain of his betrayal. I lost control, she admitted, but I never meant to hurt him. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict, guilty of assault. But with mitigating circumstances, Amelia was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. The sentence was both a punishment and an opportunity for her to rebuild her life. Victor's public image was tarnished, his business suffering from the scandal. For the first time, he faced the consequences of his actions beyond the confines of their marriage. In prison, Amelia began to heal. Therapy sessions helped her process her emotions and understand the patterns that had led to her breakdown. She began writing in a journal, chronicling her journey from betrayal to self-discovery. Victor, too, sought therapy. He reached out to their children, attempting to repair the strained relationships that his actions had caused. Though forgiveness was a long way off, he was determined to change. 2 years later, Amelia was granted parole. She emerged from prison stronger and more self-aware. Victor was waiting outside, not with an apology but with an acknowledgement. I was wrong, he said simply, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. Amelia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked out at the horizon, the weight of the past still present but no longer defining her. I don't know what the future holds, she said, but I'm ready to face it. Amelia sat in the dim light of the living room, her fingers gripping the edge of a manila folder. Inside were photographs, receipts, and printouts, evidence gathered by Alex Rivera, the private investigator she'd hired. She stared at the images, Victor and Cecilia at a waterfront restaurant, their faces illuminated by candlelight, a hotel receipt for a suite booked under Victor's alias, and most damning of all, an email exchange where Cecilia wrote, "The sooner you leave her, the sooner we can be free." Her breath came in shallow gasps as her mind raced. Every moment of doubt, every unexplained late night, every dismissive comment Victor had made came flooding back in vivid detail. She felt a cold knot in her stomach tighten as she realized the full extent of his betrayal. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was Alex. She hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Devereaux." Alex's voice was calm but firm. "I've found more." Amelia closed her eyes, steadying herself. "Tell me, there's a financial connection between your husband and Cecilia. Offshore accounts, suspicious transfers, he's funding her lifestyle. This isn't just an affair, it's a partnership." Amelia's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean, partnership?" "It looks like Cecilia's been using Victor to get access to these accounts. She's not just a mistress, she's a liability." The words hit Amelia like a blow. "How long has this been going on?" she whispered. "Over a year," Alex replied. "Mabe." Amelia ended the call without another word, her hands trembling. A year. An entire year of lies and deception. She looked at the photos again, her vision blurring with tears. The man she had loved, the father of her children, had not only betrayed her emotionally but had also risked their family's stability for this woman. The sound of Victor's car pulling into the driveway broke the silence. Amelia remained seated in the living room, her heart pounding. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, the familiar creak of the front door, and then his voice. Amelia? I'm home. She didn't answer. The tension in the air was palpable as Victor entered the living room. Loosening his tie, he froze when he saw the folder on the coffee table. What's this? He asked, his tone wary. Amelia stood, her face pale but resolute. Evidence. Victor laughed nervously, stepping closer. Evidence of what? Of your lies, your affair, your little partnership with Cecilia. Amelia spat, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Victor's face darkened. You had me followed? I had no choice. Amelia's voice rose. You've been lying to me for over a year. Victor, do you think I'm a fool? Do you think I wouldn't notice? Victor's expression shifted to defensiveness. It's not what you think. Not what I think. Amelia grabbed one of the photographs and thrust it at him. Explain this. Then, explain why you're holding hands with her at a resort while I'm home. Taking care of our family. Victor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he paced the room, his jaw clenched. Finally, he turned to her. I made a mistake. A mistake? Amelia's voice cracked. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is missing a dinner. This is a betrayal. I didn't mean for it to happen, Victor said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. It got out of control. Amelia's laugh was bitter. Out of control? You funded her lifestyle, Victor. You risked everything, our family, our future, for what? For her? Victor stepped closer, his hands outstretched. Amelia, please, let's talk about this. She backed away, her eyes blazing. There's nothing to talk about. I trusted you. I sacrificed for you. And you threw it all away. Victor sighed, running a hand through his hair. I still love you. The words felt like a slap. Amelia shook her head, her voice cold. You don't get to say that. Not after what you've done. Victor spent the night in the guest room. The tension in the house unbearable. Amelia couldn't sleep. She replayed the confrontation over and over. Her anger and heartbreak battling for dominance. The next morning, Victor tried to apologize again. But Amelia wouldn't hear it. Save your apologies for someone who cares, she said, her voice flat. Later that day, Maggie called. Amelia hesitated but finally answered. Mom, is everything okay? You sound off. Amelia struggled to keep her voice steady. Everything's fine, sweetheart. But Maggie wasn't convinced. Is it Dad? Did he do something? Amelia couldn't hold back the tears. I'll be okay, she whispered. Don't worry about me. Maggie didn't press. But the call left Amelia feeling even more isolated. She knew she couldn't hide the truth forever. But for now, she needed to process it alone. Amelia tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her pulse quickening as she observed Cecilia. The woman seemed to radiate confidence. Her tailored dress hugging her figure perfectly. Her dark sunglasses shielding her eyes. She looked like someone who had won, a sharp contrast to the chaos Amelia felt inside. You think you can just walk away from this, don't you? Amelia muttered under her breath, her nails digging into the leather of the steering wheel. For days, Amelia had been debating whether to confront Cecilia directly. The photographs, the receipts, and Victor's half-hearted excuses weren't enough. She needed answers, from her. Before she could second-guess herself, Amelia stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the pavement. Cecilia looked up as Amelia approached, her expression shifting from mild surprise to amusement. Well, this is unexpected, Cecilia said, lowering her sunglasses. Her voice was smooth, almost teasing. You know who I am, Amelia said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. Cecilia leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs gracefully. Of course I do. You're Victor's wife. Amelia bristled at the casual way Cecilia said it, as if she were discussing the weather. And you're the woman who's been destroying my marriage. Cecilia tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. Destroying? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? Victor made his own choices. I didn't force him to do anything. Amelia's fists clenched at her sides. You knew he was married. You knew he had a family. And yet, Cecilia interrupted, leaning forward. He still came to me. What does that say about your precious marriage? The words cut deeper than Amelia wanted to admit. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks. But she refused to back down. You think you've won, don't you? You think you've taken everything from me. Cecilia shrugged, unbothered. I think Victor is a grown man who makes his own decisions. If you can't keep him happy, that's not my fault. The air between them crackled with tension. Amelia's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You don't know me, and you have no idea what I'm capable of. Cecilia smirked, picking up her espresso cup. Oh, I think I do. You're a desperate housewife trying to cling to a man who's already left you in every way that matters. If I were you, I'd save what dignity I have left. Amelia's hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the table. For a moment, she considered flipping it over, letting the coffee spill across Cecilia's perfect outfit. But she stopped herself. She wouldn't give Cecilia the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. Instead, she straightened, her voice steady. Enjoy this while it lasts. Women like you always lose in the end. Cecilia chuckled, leaning back in her chair. We'll see about that. Back in her car, Amelia sat gripping the steering wheel. Her breathing shallow. She felt an overwhelming mix of anger, humiliation, and despair. The encounter had shaken her. But it also strengthened her resolve. Cecilia wasn't just a symptom of Victor's betrayal, she was a deliberate, calculating force behind it. Amelia opened her phone and called Alex Rivera. I want everything you can find on Cecilia, she said, her voice firm. Her past, her finances, everything. Alex hesitated. Are you sure you want to dig that deep? You might not like what you find. I don't care, Amelia snapped. I need to know who I'm dealing with. Later that night, Cecilia sat in her apartment, scrolling through messages on her phone. One was from Victor, pleading for her to meet him to talk things through. She ignored it. Another was from a blocked number. You've made a mistake crossing me. Cecilia smirked. She received empty threats all the time, angry ex-wives, jealous girlfriends. None of them had ever followed through. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled onto her couch, confident that Amelia was just another woman unable to face the truth about her failing marriage. But as she sipped her wine, she couldn't shake a strange feeling. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, Amelia was different. Amelia sat on the edge of the couch, her hands gripping the stem of her wineglass so tightly that she feared it might shatter. The folder containing Alex Rivera's latest report on Cecilia lay open on the coffee table, its contents spilling out like an accusation. Bank transfers, private correspondence, and photographs painted a vivid picture of Victor's betrayal and Cecilia's manipulation. The sound of the front door opening pulled Amelia from her thoughts. Victor stepped inside, loosening his tie as he kicked off his shoes. His eyes darted to her, surprise flashing across his face when he saw her sitting in the shadows. Amelia, he said, his tone cautious. Why are you still up? Amelia didn't respond immediately. She took a slow sip of her wine, her gaze fixed on the folder. Working late again? She asked, her voice deceptively calm. Victor hesitated. Yeah, busy day. Busy, Amelia repeated, her tone laced with sarcasm. Is that what we're calling it now? Victor frowned. Amelia, what's this about? What's this about? Amelia stood abruptly, her movements sharp and deliberate. She grabbed one of the photographs from the table and thrust it at him. It's about this. It's about you lying to me, betraying me, making a fool out of me. Victor's face paled as he glanced at the photo. He opened his mouth to speak, but Amelia cut him off. Don't you dare deny it, she snapped, her voice rising. Don't you dare stand there and tell me that this, she gestured to the photograph, her hand trembling, isn't exactly what it looks like. Victor sighed, running a hand through his hair. Amelia, please, let's not do this tonight. Not tonight? Amelia's voice cracked, her anger bubbling over. When, Victor? When is a good time for you to explain why you've been sneaking around with that woman while I've been here, holding this family together? Victor took a step toward her, his hands raised defensively. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. Amelia said, her voice shaking with emotion. I understand that I've spent 20 years of my life building a life with you. Trusting you, loving you, and you threw it all away for her. Victor's silence was deafening. He couldn't meet her gaze. And that silence was all the confirmation Amelia needed. Amelia's fury boiled over. Do you even love me anymore, Victor? Or was I just convenient? Victor finally looked at her. His expression a mixture of guilt and frustration. I didn't mean for this to happen. But it did, Amelia shouted, tears streaming down her face. You let it happen. You chose her over me. Over us. Over this family. Victor took another step forward. His voice softening. Amelia, I made a mistake. But it doesn't mean I don't care about you. Amelia laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. Care about me? You don't care about anyone but yourself. Victor's patience snapped. You're not perfect. Amelia, you think this marriage has been easy? You think I haven't sacrificed anything? Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me. Don't you dare blame me for this. Amelia hissed, her voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare make this my fault. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Victor turned away, retreating to the bedroom without another word. The sound of the door closing was like a final nail in the coffin of their marriage. Left alone in the living room, Amelia's anger gave way to despair. She stared at the wine bottle on the table, the half-empty glass mocking her. Her mind raced with memories of their life together, their wedding day, the birth of their children, the quiet evenings they used to share. All of it felt like a cruel joke now. A facade that had crumbled under the weight of his lies. She stumbled into the kitchen, her vision blurred by tears. Her hand hovered over the knife block, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. A part of her screamed to stop, to think, but another part, louder, angrier, drowned out all reason. Amelia grabbed the largest knife, its blade catching the light. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She pushed open the bedroom door, her heart pounding in her chest. Victor lay sprawled on the bed, already asleep, his face serene and untroubled. The sight of him, so at peace while she was consumed by rage and pain, pushed her over the edge. Her hands trembled as she approached, the knife clutched tightly in her grip. The next moments passed in a blur. Victor's scream shattered the silence, followed by the sound of the knife clattering to the floor. Amelia stumbled back, her hands covered in blood, her chest heaving. Victor clutched his side, the wound deep but not fatal. Amelia's fury dissolved into horror as the reality of what she'd done hit her. She fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry, she whispered, over and over. I'm so sorry. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder. A neighbor must have heard the commotion and called the police. Amelia didn't resist when the officers arrived, her hands shaking as they placed the cold handcuffs around her wrists. Victor was rushed to the hospital, his face pale but conscious. As Amelia was led away, she caught one last glimpse of him, his expression a mixture of shock and something she couldn't quite place, fear, regret, or perhaps both. Amelia stared blankly at the table, her mind a fog of shock and regret. The events of the past hour replayed in fragments. Victor's scream, the blood on her hands, the flashing red and blue lights outside the house. It didn't feel real, none of it did. The door opened, and Detective Harlan Monroe stepped inside. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent dealing with humanity's darkest moments. He carried a notepad and a cup of coffee, placing them on the table before sitting across from her. Mrs. Devereaux, he began, his tone measured but firm. Do you understand why you're here? Amelia didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on the table, her hands trembling in the cuffs. Monroe sighed, leaning forward. I want to help you, he said, but I need you to talk to me. Can you do that? She finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I didn't mean to hurt him, she whispered. I didn't know what else to do. Monroe nodded, jotting something down in his notepad. Why don't you start from the beginning? Tell me what happened tonight. Amelia hesitated, her voice trembling as she began to speak. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I just wanted answers. I wanted him to tell me the truth. About what? Monroe asked. About her, Amelia said, her voice breaking. Cecilia. Monroe's pen paused mid-sentence. Cecilia? Who is she? She's the woman he's been seeing. Amelia explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. I found the emails, the photos. I even hired someone to follow him. He was lying to me. Betraying me. And when I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. And then what happened? Monroe pressed gently. We argued, Amelia said, tears streaming down her face. He went to bed like nothing had happened. Like he didn't care. And I lost control. Monroe leaned back in his chair, studying her. You took the knife from the kitchen. Was that planned? Or was it a spur-of-the-moment decision? I wasn't thinking, Amelia said, shaking her head. I just wanted to make him feel the way I felt, hurt. Betrayed. But the moment I saw the blood, I realized what I'd done. Monroe closed his notepad and leaned forward. Mrs. Devereaux, what you've done is serious. Your husband is lucky to be alive. But if there's more to this story, if you were pushed to this point, you need to tell me everything. At the hospital, Victor lay in a sterile room, his side bandaged and throbbing with pain. The doctor had told him the wound wasn't fatal, but it would leave a scar. Physically, he would heal. Emotionally, he wasn't so sure. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the argument with Amelia. He hadn't expected her to confront him so directly, let alone lash out with such violence. But he couldn't deny that he had driven her to this point. His affair with Cecilia, the lies, the neglect, it had all led to this moment. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Detective Monroe stepped inside, his notepad in hand. Mr. Devereaux, he said, his tone brisk. I need to ask you a few questions about what happened tonight. Victor nodded weakly. Go ahead. Monroe wasted no time. How long have you been seeing Cecilia? Victor hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. About a year, he admitted, but it's not what you think. I think it's exactly what it looks like. Monroe said, his voice sharp. Your wife didn't snap out of nowhere. She found out about the affair. Didn't she? Victor nodded, his guilt evident. She confronted me about it tonight. I tried to calm her down. But things got out of hand. Things got out of hand because you betrayed her. Monroe said bluntly. You may not have held the knife, but you lit the fuse. Victor flinched at the accusation but didn't argue. He knew Monroe was right. What happens to her now? He asked quietly. That depends. Monroe replied. If there's more to this story, if your wife acted in self-defense or under extreme emotional distress, it could impact the charges. But she attacked you with a knife. Mr. Devereaux, that's a felony. Victor closed his eyes, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He had destroyed his marriage, hurt the woman who had loved him unconditionally, and now, his choices might cost her her freedom. Back at the station, Monroe reviewed his notes. The case was clear-cut on the surface, a domestic dispute that had escalated to violence. But something about Amelia's demeanor bothered him. She didn't seem like a violent person, she seemed broken, desperate. He made a note to dig deeper into Victor's relationship with Cecilia. If Amelia's claims were true, there might be more to this story than a simple crime of passion. Monroe couldn't shake the feeling that Cecilia was more than just an affair, that she might hold the key to understanding why everything had spiraled out of control. The judge called the courtroom to order, the sound of the gavel silencing the whispers that filled the air. This court is now in session, he declared. The case of the state versus Amelia Devereaux will proceed. Evelyn stood, her sharp gaze scanning the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, this case is not about violence, but desperation. My client is a devoted wife and mother who was driven to the breaking point by betrayal, manipulation, and years of emotional neglect. She gestured toward Victor. The man she attacked is not just a victim, he is also the catalyst for her actions. The evidence will show that while Amelia Devereaux's actions were wrong, they were not unprovoked. This case is about understanding, not condemnation. The prosecutor wasted no time countering. Betrayal does not excuse attempted murder, she said, her voice firm. We are here to seek justice for the victim. Victor Devereaux, who was attacked in his own home by the woman he trusted. The first witness called to the stand was Maggie, Amelia and Victor's eldest daughter. Maggie's hands trembled as she swore the oath, her eyes darting between her parents. She spoke of the tension that had filled their home in the months leading up to the attack. "My mom, she tried so hard to keep things together," Maggie said, her voice cracking. "But my dad, he was never around. And when he was, it was like he wasn't really there. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what." The prosecutor leaned forward. "Did your mother ever express violent tendencies before the night of the attack?" "No," Maggie said firmly. "My mom isn't violent. She's just hurt." Evelyn stood for cross-examination. "Maggie, did you ever hear your father admit to having an affair?" Maggie hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I overheard them arguing about it." "And how did your mother react?" Evelyn asked gently. "She cried," Maggie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She begged him to tell her the truth. But he brushed her off." Victor was next on the stand. His face was pale, his demeanor subdued. He admitted to the affair, his voice heavy with guilt. "I made a mistake," he said. "I hurt my wife in ways I can't take back. But I never thought it would lead to this." The prosecutor pressed him. "Did you feel threatened by your wife before the attack?" Victor hesitated. "No," he admitted. "She was angry, but she wasn't violent." Evelyn pounced on the admission. "Mr. Devereaux, would you say that your actions, the affair, the lies, contributed to your wife's emotional state?" Victor's gaze dropped. "Yes." The turning point came when Detective Monroe took the stand. His investigation into Cecilia's background had uncovered a web of deceit. He presented evidence of Cecilia's pattern of targeting wealthy, married men, using them for financial gain, and then moving on when the relationship soured. This wasn't just an affair, Monroe testified. It was manipulation. Cecilia knew exactly what she was doing, and she used Mr. Devereaux to further her own interests. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Monroe continued. "While this does not excuse Mrs. Devereaux's actions, it provides crucial context. She was not just reacting to infidelity, she was reacting to a calculated betrayal." When Amelia took the stand, she spoke with raw emotion. "I loved my husband," she said, her voice trembling. "I gave him everything, my trust, my support, my life, and he threw it away for someone who only cared about herself." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "What I did was wrong. I know that, but I wasn't trying to kill him. I just wanted him to understand how much he'd hurt me." Evelyn asked her one final question. "What do you want the jury to understand about you, Amelia?" Amelia took a deep breath. "I'm not a monster. I'm a woman who was pushed to her breaking point. I regret what I did. But I also know I deserve to tell my side of the story." After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the decision. Guilty of assault with mitigating circumstances. Amelia was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 1 year. Amelia's shoulders sagged with relief. It wasn't freedom, but it was a chance to rebuild her life.